Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. The G7 is underway and China will be top of the agenda. We will discuss the outcomes of the meeting as they relate to the PRC, as well as Beijing's reaction over the weekend. And on this point, there will likely not be a video tomorrow, Saturday, but I will make up for it with an episode on Sunday. While the G7 meet in Hiroshima, Japan, yesterday, Thursday evening, the so-called China Central Asia Summit kicked off in the ancient city of Xi'an in northwest China's Shanxi province. The ceremony was held in the so-called Tang Paradise, a complex based on the site of the original imperial gardens dating back to the Tang dynasty. Central Asia is of increasing economic, energy and strategic importance to Beijing. On the trade side alone, two-way trade between China and Central Asia hit a record $70 billion last year, with Kazakhstan leading with $31 billion. General Secretary Xi Jinping has met with the president of Kyrgyzstan, who expressed, quote, support for the Global Security Initiative and the Global Development Initiative, and stands ready to work with China to jointly boost the security and development of the two countries and the region, end quote. The leaders also promised to, quote, spare no effort in providing a safe and sound investment environment for Chinese companies, end quote. The two sides signed a joint declaration on establishing a comprehensive strategic partnership in the new era. Similar statements and deals were discussed with the president of Tajikistan, with Xi calling for a, quote, shared future featuring everlasting friendship, solidarity and mutual benefit, end quote, adding that the two sides should, quote, deepen all-round strategic cooperation and firmly support each other on issues concerning their core interests, including national sovereignty, independence, security, and territorial integrity, end quote. The two countries signed 13 cooperation documents, including plans for joint counter-terrorism exercises and for the Chinese technology giant Huawei to build a data center in Tajikistan. Indeed, unlike other meetings which focused more on trade and energy, Xi's statements with Tajikistan were more security-focused. We remember that Tajikistan shares a long border with China's unstable Xinjiang province, as well as Afghanistan, which no longer has a US military presence. Back in 2021, Tajikistan's parliament announced that China will finance the construction of an outpost for a special forces unit of the country's police near the Tajik-Afghan border. She also held talks with Uzbekistan's leader. Once again, similar themes were highlighted in the talks: exhortations of friendship and a shared future, as well as support for key Xi Jinping thought foreign policy initiatives like the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative. We will once again be looking at the Global Civilization Initiative in the next video. She told Turkmenistan's president that, quote, China is willing to expand cooperation with Turkmenistan in areas such as economy, trade, natural gas, and connectivity, and to explore high-tech companies in fields like communications and aerospace, end quote. And finally, she also held talks with the leader of Kazakhstan. According to Chinese state-run China Daily, the two heads of state signed a joint statement to promote cooperation on transportation to stabilize industry and supply chains, including steps to explore building a third cross-border railway line and constructing new railway border ports. Interestingly, the two also, quote, agreed to enhance cooperation on preventing color revolutions, end quote. Okay, I tell you what, the last few minutes of content took several hours of research, mostly in Mandarin, but I did it because I believe we need to be following these developments closely. I know it is dry, but it is very important that we are aware of these geopolitical moves in Central Asia. Moscow will be watching especially closely too. Quote, the PRC may prefer that the war in Ukraine end, but it does have some benefits for China, including accelerating the diminution of Russia's influence and reputation in Central Asia. Putin cannot be pleased with the China-Central Asia summit, which is again making clear that China is the future for these countries and Russia is the past. And the selection of the location, Xi'an, the start of the Silk Road, is a reminder that the future is also linked to a much earlier past. End quote. Indeed, UK-based financial media outlet Financial Times reports this week about a, quote, proposal for China, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to build a $4.1 billion rail link that would open up rail-only travel to Europe. This would avoid going through Russia. End quote. However, Beijing is likely much more selective these days about large-scale investment projects in developing economies, especially unstable ones, as the growing debt crisis across the developing and emerging world has presented China with both diplomatic and financial headaches. A recent study led by Boston University shows that 61 developing and emerging economies are in debt distress or face high risk of debt distress. Then this week, the New York-based Associated Press published a disquieting report titled "China's Loans Pushing World's Poorest Countries to Brink of Collapse," based on an analysis of a dozen countries most indebted to China, including Pakistan, Kenya, Zambia, Laos, and Mongolia. The outlet alleges that, quote, paying back that debt is consuming an ever greater amount of the tax revenue needed to keep schools open, provide electricity, and pay for food and fuel. And it's draining foreign currency reserves these countries use to pay interest on these loans, leaving some with just months before that money is gone. End quote. If this is an accurate characterization, then it's certainly not good for these countries, but it is also not good for China's global image, both within the developed world, where it is already at historic lows, as well as in parts of the developing world, where it still has maintained moderate positive attitudes. The Associated Press report argues that, quote, China's reluctance to forgive debt and its extreme secrecy about how much money it has loaned and on what terms has kept other major lenders from stepping in to help. End quote. Adding that Beijing has taken on a new kind of hidden lending that has added to the confusion and distrust. Quote, China's central bank has effectively been lending tens of billions of dollars through what appear as ordinary foreign currency exchanges. End quote. Geopolitics is playing a role in all of this too. For example, Sri Lanka's creditor nations, including China and Japan, have begun discussing restructuring the country's debt. Sri Lanka's external debt totaled $35.1 billion as of the end of September last year, according to Japan's finance ministry. China is the biggest creditor to the nation, followed by Japan and then India. And this is no coincidence either. Sri Lanka occupies a strategic location in a sea lane connecting East Asia with the Middle East and Africa. As such, these three countries, all regional players, all have strategic interests in the small island nation. Of course, China has its own debt issues back home. Next up, we look at, once again, its housing crisis. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. It's just me making these episodes every day. It's a lot of work, but your guys' support is a huge source of motivation. Subscribing and sharing is a huge help as well, and for those who can go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, let's finish with housing. According to new data from the National Bureau of Statistics, published on Wednesday, China's home price growth slowed in April, quote, underscoring the challenges the market is facing following a brief recovery, end quote, in the words of financial media outlet Bloomberg. New home prices in 70 cities, excluding state-subsidized housing, rose 0.32% last month from March, when they grew 0.44%. Price gains slowed to just 0.01% in the secondary market after climbing 0.26% a month earlier. Because home prices are politically sensitive, we should look at a 0.01% increase with some skepticism. It was hoped in Q1, after 18 months of a price slump and massive government support, that perhaps the market had finally stabilized. However, this renewed growth slowdown puts this into question. The National Bureau of Statistics data from this week also showed a plunge in investment in April, and key household mid to long-term loans, a proxy for mortgages, posted the first decline in a year in April too. Still, industry analysts remain hopeful that perhaps stabilization can be achieved this year. On Monday, ratings firm Moody's Investors Service upgraded the sector's outlook to stable from negative, writing that property sales should stabilize in the next 12 months. Not everyone agrees, however. Quote, "I'd argue that the best we can hope for is for China's property sector to stabilize at current levels for a while before dropping further. Prices are still incredibly high by global and historical standards, and supply still exceeds most reasonable estimates of future demand." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Have a great Friday wherever you are, have a lovely weekend, and if I don't see you on Saturday, I will see you all on Sunday.